I'm smoking mango-flavored cigars, and they're totally shitty. But they're cheap. They're like $1 for 2 of them, but they're awful. Mango-flavored. Why would anyone want to smoke a cigar that's mango-flavored? It's the worst. It's the worst. Okay. A correction. I looked up the pronunciation for pergamene. The Greek place I believe it's in Asia, it was in Asia Minor. The place is Pergamon, but the art is pronounced pergamene, not pergamene. So, so like an idiot, I was totally mispronouncing it. So I looked that up. I also looked up physiognomy, and it does have 2 pronunciations. You can either pronounce the G or not. Apparently, the British pronunciation is what I'm using. Physiognomy, where the G is silent. The American pronunciation pronounces the G, physiognomy. But I don't like that. It sounds clumsy. So I like physiognomy. So I'm glad I was at least right about that. Sometimes I get pronunciations wrong, and it's embarrassing. All right, so we're headed here into Chapter 4, one of my favorite chapters, The Problem of World History 2, the idea of destiny and the principle of causality. So now he's going to take the physiognomic and the systematic and transform them yet again, so that the physiognomic has to do, as we've seen with the world as history, and hence also with the destiny idea, and each civilization, as we'll find, has a different idea of destiny that it's working out. And the causality principle then is linked with the systematic mentality and the world as nature. So we'll follow these transformations. They'll undergo a few more transformations too. Later it'll be, in Volume 2, it'll be Voxine and Dasein. And it's the same basic, it's always space versus time somehow. Okay, so Chapter 4, Subsection 1. So let's go ahead with this now. Following out this train of thought to the end, we come into the presence of an opposition in which we perceive the key, the only key, wherewith to approach, and, so far as the word has any meaning at all, to solve one of the oldest and gravest of man's riddles. This is the opposition of the destiny idea and the causality principle, an opposition which, it is safe to say, has never hitherto been recognized for what it is, the necessary foundation of world building. Anyone who understands at all what is meant by saying that the soul is the idea of an existence will also divine a near relationship between it and the sure sense of a destiny, and must regard life itself, our name for the form in which the actualizing of the possible is accomplished, as directed, irrevocable, in every line, fate-laden. And now we're going to move into a discussion of time, what he thinks time is, and also great tragedy, which is a civilization's way of working out its destiny idea. In India, though, you don't have great tragedy, because they have the idea of reincarnation, which, as it turns out, is actually the correct idea. We do reincarnate from lifetime to lifetime. And the Hindus have reincarnation, so they don't really ever have tragedy per se, but they most certainly have a destiny idea. Karma is a destiny idea that they have, that the heroes in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are indeed reincarnations and have past lives. All of the heroes in all of Indian literature have had past lives, and they have reincarnation. So their destiny idea is karma. So they don't really have tragedy per se. Since there is no real tragedy, what happens to you? You die, you're going to bounce back again anyway. What's the tragedy? In the West, we have tragedy because we value the individual life and don't have the idea of reincarnation. So therefore, we have tragedy. It's so tragic to lose this person. We're never going to see this person again. This person will never exist again. That's part of what's involved in the West's idea of tragedy. It's not in the East, but the East has it correct. We do reincarnate. And only Rudolf Steiner is the only great thinker in the West, in the recent West anyway, who got this right. Primitive man feels this dimly and anxiously, while for the man of a higher culture, it is definite enough to become his vision of the world. Though this vision is communicable only through religion and art, never through notions and proofs. Every higher language possesses a number of words such as luck, doom, conjuncture. I believe the word luck, by the way, I'm only guessing on this, but I believe the word luck comes from the Hindu goddess of luck. Lakshmi is her name, and she's the goddess of luck. I have a feeling the word luck is etymologically related by means of the Indo-Aryan world that we share in common with the Indian world. Luck, doom, conjuncture, vocation, about which there is, as it were, a veil. No hypothesis, no science can ever get into touch with that which we feel when we let ourselves sink into the meaning and sound of these words. They are symbols, not notions. In them is the center of gravity of that world picture that I've called the world as history, as opposed to the world as nature. The destiny idea demands life experience and not scientific experience, the power of seeing and not that of calculating depth and not intellect. Well, let me give an example of this. This comes from, I believe, Democritus, the Greek materialist, atomist philosopher. There was a man of whom it was said that he would die as a result of a thunderbolt from Zeus. That was supposedly going to be his destiny. So he's out walking along the beach, and an eagle drops a stone on his head and kills him. The eagle is, of course, sacred to Zeus, so then it was regarded as, therefore his destiny has been fulfilled. That's his life looked at from this point of view of the destiny idea. Now the man of causality comes along. Here comes the causality guy, the Socratic man, the atheist, the materialist, the shallow man. He comes along and says, well, wait a minute. I've studied the habits of eagles, and they like to pick up stones so they can drop them on the shells of turtles and crack open their shells so they can get access to the meat inside there. This is just the habits of eagles. They drop stones on turtles. And they mistook this guy's head, bald head, maybe he was bald-headed, for a turtle. That's the causality principles. That's how you look at the same exact incident from the point of view of causality and the point of view of the destiny idea. Two different ways of regarding the world. One is shallow, and the other is deep, and takes into account that there are other forces involved in the phenomena of our lives. Like I was talking about last time with that number synchronicity that I experienced with the number 428. I experience those kinds of synchronicities all the time, and they are part of a bigger synchronicitous destiny idea that I live within. I live in a world that is rich and deep with meaning, that talks back to me constantly. I don't have a shallow experience of life, and consequently, I don't experience life as something random. To me, it's meaningful. It's laden with the destiny idea. So let's proceed. There is no organic logic, an instinctive, dream-sure logic of all existence. No, he says there is. There is an organic logic, as opposed to the logic of the inorganic, the logic of understanding and of things understood, a logic of direction as against a logic of extension. And no systematist, no Aristotle or Kant, has known how to deal with it. They are on their own ground when they tell us about judgment, perception, awareness, and recollection. But as to what is in the words hope, happiness, despair, repentance, devotion, and consolation, they are silent. That's left up to the literary people. He who expects here, in the domain of the living, to find reasons and consequences, or imagines that an inward certainty as to the meaning of life is the same as fatalism or predestination. Okay, last time it was Skype, this time my phone just went off. Fatalism or predestination simply knows nothing of the matters in question, confusing experience lived with experience acquired or acquirable. Causality is the reasonable, the law-bound, the describable, the badge of our whole waking and reasoning existence. But destiny is the word for an inner certainty that is not describable. We bring out that which is in the causal by means of a physical or an epistemological system through numbers, by reason and classification, but the idea of destiny can be imparted only by the artist working through media like portraiture, tragedy, and music. The one requires us to distinguish, and in distinguishing, to dissect and destroy, whereas the other is creative through and through, and thus destiny is related to life and causality to death. In the destiny idea, the soul reveals its world longing, its desire to rise into the light, to accomplish and actualize its vocation. To no man is it entirely alien, and not before one has become the unanchored late man of the megalopolis is original vision quite overpowered by matter-of-fact feeling and mechanizing thought. Even then, in some intense hour, the lost vision comes back to one with terrible clearness, shattering in a moment all the causality of the world's surface. For the world as a system of causal connections is not only a late, but also a highly rarefied conception, and only the energetic intellects of high cultures are capable of possessing it, or perhaps we should say devising it with conviction. The notion of causality is coterminous with the notion of law. The only laws that are causal laws. But just as there lies in the causal, according to Kant, a necessity of the thinking consciousness and the basic form of its relation to the essence of things, so also designated by the words destiny, dispensation, vocation, there is a something that is an inevitable necessity of life. Real history is heavy with fate, but free of laws. One can divine the future. There is indeed a certain insight that can penetrate its secrets deeply, but one cannot reckon it. The physiognomic flair which enables one to read a whole life in a face, or to sum up whole peoples from the picture of an epoch, and to do so without deliberate effort or system, is utterly remote from all cause and effect. He who comprehends the light world that is before his eyes, not physiognomically but systematically, and makes it intellectually his own by the methods of causal experience, must necessarily in the end come to believe that every living thing can be understood by reference to cause and effect, that is, that there is no secret and no interdirectedness. He, on the other hand, who, as Goethe did, and for that matter as everyone does in 9 out of 10 of his waking moments, lets the impressions of the world about him work merely upon his senses, absorbs these impressions as a whole, feels the become in its becoming. The stiff mask of causality is lifted by mere ceasing to think. Suddenly time is no more a riddle, a notion, a form or dimension, but becomes an inner certainty, destiny itself. And in its directedness, its irreversibility, its livingness, is disclosed the very meaning of the historical world picture. Destiny and causality are related as time and space. In the two possible world forms, then, history and nature, the physiognomy of all becoming, and the system of all things become, destiny or causality prevails. I like how as we proceed through this text, it gets richer and richer as this basic metaphysical bivalent opposition of what started out with as world as nature versus world as history. It just keeps on resonating and taking on more and more meaning, like a leitmotif from Wagnerian opera. Between them, there is all the difference between a feeling of life and a method of knowledge. Each of them is the starting point of a complete and self-contained, but not of a unique world. Yet, after all, just as the become is founded upon a becoming, so the knowledge of cause and effect is founded upon the sure feeling of a destiny. Causality is, so to say, destiny become, destiny made inorganic and modeled in reason forms. Destiny itself passed over in silence by Kant and every other builder of rational world systems, because with their armory of abstractions they could not touch life. Stands beyond and outside all comprehended nature. Nevertheless, being itself the original, it alone gives the stiff, dead principle of cause and effect the opportunity to figure in the later scenes of a culture drama, alive and historical as the incarnation of a tyrannical thinking. The existence of the classical soul is the condition for the appearance of Democritus's method. I just gave a whole story about Democritus. The existence of the Faustian soul for that of Newton's. We may well imagine that either of these cultures might have failed to produce a natural science of its own, but we cannot imagine the systems without their cultural foundations. Here again, we see how becoming and the become, direction and extension, include one another, and are subordinated each to the other according as we are in the historical or in the natural focus. If history is that kind of world order in which all the become is fitted to the becoming, then the products of scientific work must inter alia be so handled. And in fact, for the historical eye, there is only a history of physics. It was destiny that the discoveries of oxygen, Neptune, gravitation, and spectrum analysis happened as and when they did. It was destiny that the phlogiston theory, the undulatory theory of light, the kinetic theory of gases could arise at all, seeing that they were elucidations of results and, as such, highly personal to their respective authors, and that other theories, correct or erroneous, might equally well have been developed instead. And it is again destiny and the result of strong personality when one theory vanishes and another becomes the lodestar of the physicist's world. Even the born physicist speaks of the fate of a problem or the history of a discovery. Conversely, if nature is that constitution of things in which the becoming should logically be incorporated in the thing become, and living direction in rigid extension, history may best be treated as a chapter of epistemology, and so indeed Kant would have treated it if he had remembered to include it at all in his system of knowledge. Significantly enough, he did not. For him, as for every born systematist, nature is the world, and when he discusses time without noticing that it has direction and is irreversible, we see that he is dealing with the nature world and has no inkling of the possibility of another, the history world. Perhaps for Kant, this other world was actually impossible. I think he refers to Kant and Goethe the most often in this text. You keep hearing both of their names. Kant said this, and he was wrong about that. Goethe always appears in a context of privilege. He's always right. Goethe was always right, and then Kant always appears in a context of, no, Kant was wrong about this, wrong about the other thing. He's the world as nature man. Goethe is his archetypal world as history man. And so just like Derrida said, anytime you get a metaphysical bivalent opposition, one of those two terms is privileged over the other, such as the voice being privileged over writing, or man being privileged over woman. Whatever the metaphysical dichotomy is, one of the two terms is always privileged, and it's very certain that the world as history, the becoming, analogy, form, the destiny idea, all that is privileged. That's the side Spengler favors. Now, causality has nothing whatsoever to do with time. To the world of today, made up of Kantians who know not how Kantian they are, this must seem an outrageous paradox, and yet every formula of Western physics exhibits the how and the how long as distinct in essence. As soon as the question is pressed home, causality restricts its answer rigidly to the statement that something happens, and not when it happens. The effect must of necessity be put with the cause. The distance between them belongs to a different order. It lies within the act of understanding itself, which is an element of life, and not within the thing or things understood. It is of the essence of the extended that it overcomes directedness, and of space that it contradicts time, and yet the latter, as the more fundamental, precedes and underlies the former. Time precedes and underlies space. It's older than space, which is an interesting thought. Destiny claims the same precedence. We begin with the idea of destiny, and only later, when our waking consciousness looks fearfully for a spell that will bind in the sense world and overcome the death that cannot be evaded, do we conceive causality as an anti-fate and make it create another world to protect us from and console us for this, the realm of time, destiny, fate, directedness, the inevitability of death. That's the world, that's what generates our world fear, and entire civilizations have this world fear that a world as nature picture has to be constructed with a causality principle as a kind of protection from the intellect, that as a protection from life, from the mortality, and having to face mortality. It's interesting that he says this, that all these world as nature pictures that we construct in accordance with the causality principle are defenses against life and the inevitability of death, especially. Death is the thing, he's going to say, he'll say this again, that motivates civilization, world fear. And as the web of cause and effect gradually spreads over the visible surfaces, there is formed a convincing picture of timeless duration, essentially being, but being endowed with attributes by the sheer force of pure thought. Here's his Sein word. Being with a capital B is how he spells it. This is his version of Sein. This tendency underlies the feeling, well known in all mature cultures, that knowledge is power, the power that is meant being power over destiny. The abstract savant, the natural science researcher, the thinker in systems, whose whole intellectual existence bases itself on the causality principle, are late manifestations of an unconscious hatred of the powers of incomprehensible destiny. A hatred of the powers of destiny, the man of science or high intellect like Kant. Pure reason denies all possibilities that are outside itself. Here, strict thought and great art are eternally in conflict. the one keeps its feet and the other lets itself go. A man like Kant must always feel himself as superior to a Beethoven as the adult is to the child, but this will not prevent a Beethoven from regarding the Critique of Pure Reason as a pitiable sort of philosophy. Now, I don't know if that's true, if Beethoven said that about the Critique of Pure Reason, that he thought it was a piece of shit. But he probably did. Knowing Beethoven's temperament, he was very... You call me the madman. I mean, Beethoven, that dude was crazy. I mean, he was like constantly yelling at everyone around him and throwing tantrums. He had to have been bipolar. There's no way around that. The dude was crazy. I could just see him throwing a rant. He threw a rant against Napoleon. I could just see him throwing a rant against Kant. All these great men interacting. It's just, it's like intellectual porn. You know, your mind just goes, ooh. Kant was, then Beethoven. Beethoven was talking about Kant. Schopenhauer is making fun of Hegel and Fichte and all these crazy guys. Schopenhauer lecturing to an empty classroom. Simply out of spite because he hates Hegel, and all the students are across the hall in Hegel's classroom. Classic stuff. I mean, it's as good as the intellectual world gets. This is why I love the German world, the world of German art and culture. These guys really fought each other and hated each other. It's so funny. Teleology, that nonsense of all nonsenses within science, is a misdirected attempt to deal mechanically with the living content of scientific knowledge. For knowledge implies someone to know, and though the substance of thought may be nature, the act of thought is history, and so with life itself as an inverted causality. Teleology is a caricature of the destiny idea, which transforms the vocation of Dante into the aim of the savant. It is the deepest and most characteristic tendency both of Darwinism, the megalopolitan intellectual product of the most abstract of all civilizations, and of the materialist conception of history, which springs from the same root as Darwinism, and, like it, kills all that is organic and faithful. Thus, the morphological element of the causal is a principle, and the morphological element of destiny is an idea that is incapable of being cognized, described, or defined, and can only be felt and inwardly lived. This idea is something of which one is either entirely ignorant, or else, like the man of the spring and every truly significant man of the late seasons, believer, lover, artist, poet, entirely certain. Thus, destiny is seen to be the true existence mode of the prime phenomenon, that in which the living idea of becoming unfolds itself immediately to the intuitive vision, and therefore the destiny idea dominates the whole world picture of history, while causality, which is the existence mode of objects, and stamps out of the world of sensations a set of well-distinguished and well-defined things, properties, and relations, dominates and penetrates as the form of the understanding, the nature world that is the understanding's alter ego. But inquiry into the degree of validity of causal connections within a presentation of nature, or what is henceforth the same thing for us, into the destinies involved in that presentation becomes far more difficult still when we come to realize that for primitive man, or for the child, no comprehensive causally ordered world exists at all as yet, and that we ourselves, though late men, with a consciousness disciplined by powerful speech-sharpened thought, can do no more, even in moments of the most strained attention, the only ones really in which we are exactly in the physical focus, than assert that the causal order which we see in such a moment is continuously present in the actuality around us. Even waking, we take in the actual, the living garment of the deity physiognomically, and we do so involuntarily and by virtue of a power of experience that is rooted in the deep sources of life. A systematic delineation, on the contrary, is the expression of an understanding emancipated from perception, and by means of it we bring the mental picture of all times and all men into conformity with the moment's picture of nature as ordered by ourselves. But the mode of this ordering, which has a history that we cannot interfere with in the smallest degree, is not the working of a cause, but a destiny. I think that's a good stopping point for this chapter, where he opens up with a really strong definition of what he means by destiny as opposed to the causality principle, and how the man whose whole world is ordered by the causality principle just doesn't get it. And there is a certain kind of philosophy that's like that. That's strictly logical, like Russell and Whitehead, let's say, or Wittgenstein, where it's just strictly logical, and you're reading it and you're thinking, this guy doesn't get life, does he? He doesn't get that life exists, that it goes on. People have sex, they fuck, they make generations. The generations come along, they're in time, and they're evolving and changing. Terrible things are happening to them, and they all have to die. The Kant, and consider too that Kant lived his entire life as a bachelor. I don't know if that means he was a repressed homosexual or just didn't like women. My guess is repressed homosexual. But his entire life as a bachelor, he lived the same day over and over again. According to witnesses, you could set your watch by the time that he went out for his walk every day. Went out for a walk, same exact time every day, probably had the same meals every day, did the same thing every day, and erected the Critique of Pure Reason in his 60s, as Spengler says here, as a defense against life, as a defense against dealing with the world of sex and death, which is life and is governed by destiny through and through. That is what it is. I wish Spengler had tied in sex and death here with this idea of life. Thomas Mann's novels and short stories are all based on this idea that there's the man of life who gets it and lives it, and the man of thought who is alienated and doesn't, and prefers death. And in embracing philosophy, in a way, you're choosing death. You're choosing to embrace the thing become, the corpse, the world captured in concepts as a dead thing. And you're kind of saying no to life in doing that. So you have to see that relation between life and death. Life includes the realm of sex and death. Those are the two poles of it, generation and corruption. Aristotle's realm, that the earth is the realm of generation and corruption, that we are caught in. And the man of thought, the great intellect, who says no. And maybe Spengler, too, he never married either, and maybe he said no to life. And he's actually a man, he is a world as nature man. He has a picture of the world here that's very abstract, highly philosophical, very much a product of late megalopolitan consciousness, even though he has the feeling for art. May also have said no to life. He lived his entire life as a bachelor. So it's interesting when you consider these guys and their lives in contradistinction to the worlds that they create. And the worlds that they create, what does that have to do with their living existence? There's always an interrelation. Are they hiding from life, or are they saying yes to it, as Nietzsche did? Although Nietzsche was also a bachelor and also was kind of a lone wolf. All these guys are. Kant, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Spengler, they were all lone wolves. People would report seeing them by themselves, always walking along. Nietzsche would go out for long walks and write in his notebook while he was walking. These guys were all lone wolves, and it's funny that I think German thought is like this, as opposed to French thought, which is more of a rhizome. All those guys, Deleuze and Guattari and Foucault, were all kind of on the same page. They were all interested in each other's ideas. They wrote prefaces to each other's books. They liked each other. They were friends. I don't know about Derrida. Derrida upset everything when he gave an early lecture. He was Foucault's star pupil, but he gave an early lecture tearing apart Foucault's first great book, Madness and Civilization, or The History of Madness, as it's called in the original form. He went in and totally deconstructed it. And Foucault was like, "You son of a bitch." So, but other than that, I mean, these guys are all pretty rhizomatic. They form assemblages with each other. The Germans don't. They're all lone wolves, and they all fight with each other, which is funny, I think. So anyway, I'll leave it there for this video.